They targeted a human family. They misjudged what that meant. The Juniper family did not travel like conquerors. They traveled like humans who had survived enough history to know when peace was rare and worth savoring. Their ship was small by galactic standards. Civilian class, reinforced but modest. Painted in faded whites and blues, its hull bore the quiet marks of long journeys rather than battle scars. Inside, the atmosphere was relaxed, almost domestic, a strange contrast to the endless void outside. Rick Juniper piloted with practiced ease. Years of war had carved precision into his movements. Today, though, there was no tension in his posture. No threat assessment running behind his eyes. This was not a mission. This was a vacation. Mary moved through the ship with the calm confidence of someone who understood space as an extension of home. Every drawer was organized. Every tool had its place. Her hands, steady and precise, handled utensils and equipment with unconscious familiarity. Annie occupied a corner of the ship's common area, stretching casually, muscles responding with trained efficiency even in low gravity. Controlled, deliberate, strength without showmanship. Elliot pressed his face against the viewport, watching stars slide past in luminous streams. His mind raced with imagination, alien worlds, strange beings, forgotten civilizations. To him, space was wonder, not war. They were drifting between systems, hopping through minor trade lanes, visiting planets known more for beauty than importance. For a few days, the universe had allowed them to forget. Then space changed. Sensors registered the anomaly first, not as danger, but as contradiction. A distortion ahead, vast and circular, swallowing starlight without emitting energy. A shadow where nothing should exist. The Juniper ship slowed automatically, systems struggling to interpret the data. And then it appeared. A colossal disc-shaped vessel unfolded into reality directly in their path. Smooth, metallic, seamless. No visible engines. No weapon ports. No communication signals. It did not approach. It did not need to. The size difference alone erased options. The Juniper ship could have fit inside its hull dozens of times over. Evasion calculations returned zero viable outcomes. Gravity shifted violently. The family ship was yanked forward as if seized by an invisible force. Controls locked. Engine screamed. Navigation failed. A blinding emerald light flooded the cabin. The light did not burn. It suppressed. Muscles locked mid-motion. Thoughts slowed, then fractured. Consciousness slipped away, like air venting into vacuum. The last thing Elliot saw was the stars disappearing. The last thing Rick felt was an old instinct too late. When Rick Juniper regained awareness, sensation returned in layers. Cold, sterile, artificial. His body lay immobilized on a metallic surface, limbs restrained with bands that hummed faintly with energy. He wore only his pants. His boots, jacket, and tools were gone. Above him, light poured from featureless panels, harsh and unrelenting. The air smelled wrong. Rick's eyes adjusted slowly. Figures surrounded him. Humanoid, slender, airless. Their skin carried a muted green hue, stretched tight over elongated skulls. Large, black, almond-shaped eyes reflected the light without expression. Grays. Rick's pulse spiked, but his breathing did not. Across the galaxy, their reputation was whispered with dread. Not conquerors, not diplomats, observers, collectors, a species that categorized life the way others cataloged minerals. Humans were statistically interesting. The Greys moved around him with clinical detachment. Instruments hovered. Scanners passed over his exposed torso. Needles adjust automatically, guided by unseen systems. They did not rush. They did not threaten. They proceeded. Rick's restraints held, for now, but his mind was already measuring distances, counting instruments, tracking movement patterns. The soldier had not disappeared. And somewhere else on this ship, Rick knew with cold certainty his family was regaining consciousness too. The Greys believed they had captured a harmless civilian family. A low-threat transport, minimal armament, no escort, a routine acquisition. They were wrong. They had abducted a demolition specialist who thought in structural weaknesses. A blade expert who understood anatomy better than most surgeons. A disciplined fighter who had trained her body to respond before fear could settle. And a child who had studied Grey behavioral archives out of curiosity. The Greys did not see predators. They saw data, and that miscalculation would take time to correct. Rick Juniper did not move, not because he couldn't, because he was listening. The chamber was seamless white, No corners, no shadows, no visible entry points. The kind of space designed to erase identity, to reduce a living being to a sample. Not a prison, a processing room. The Greys moved around him in synchronized silence. Not disciplined, networked. Each scan fed the next. Each movement responded to shared data. They weren't being careless. They simply saw no threat. This was not a war vessel. Its architecture prioritized studies and experiments with specimens. It was never designed to survive an internal insurgency. It was a collection ship, built to sedate, built to catalog, built to contain creatures that panicked, not creatures that waited. Invisible fields passed through Rick's body. Muscle density, bone composition, neural activity, internal mapping rendered in translucent projections above him. Pressure built behind his eyes, then deeper. They weren't cutting him. They were inside him, mapping reflex arcs, stress thresholds, pain response curves, and missing the only metric that mattered: intent. A multi-pronged instrument lowered toward his chest, humming softly. Not surgical, exploratory. The restraint on his right wrist flickered. Not a failure. A recalibration spike, energy redirected to reinforce neural suppression after detecting heightened cortical activity. Rick felt it. That micro shift, that redistribution. He moved on the down cycle. His arm snapped upward the instant the field dipped. Not wildly, precisely. He didn't overpower the restraint. He twisted through the weakened frequency band, collapsing it with torque instead of brute force. Sparks flared. Now the Greys reacted. Not with panic, with adjustment. A stasis pulse fired. Rick rolled off the table before it stabilized. The pulse struck empty space, freezing only air. He grabbed the descending instrument and drove it forward, not at a skull, at the base of the first Grey's elongated neck, where the neural cluster projected brightest seconds earlier. The instrument discharged. The body dropped. The others recalibrated instantly, shifting to suppression mode. The room hummed as gravity vectors fluctuated. Rick didn't charge. He moved diagonally, forcing them to compensate. One Grey extended a limb to trigger a containment field. Rick grabbed it mid-extension and twisted, using the limb's own motion to destabilize its balance. The skeletal structure wasn't built for torque. It snapped. Green fluid sprayed across the white surface. A second stasis burst activated. Rick hurled the broken limb into the emitter node overhead. The field destabilized. Feedback rippled. One Grey collapsed nervous system overloaded by its own device. Silence. Not total, but uncertain. Rick stood in the center of the chamber, breathing slow now. Not enraged. Calculating. He hadn't overpowered them. He had disrupted them. And that mattered. Then the ship responded. White light shifted to pulsing crimson. Now alarms. Now adaptation. Seams appeared in the walls, doors unfolding where surfaces had once been continuous. Rick scanned quickly. No firearms. No armor. But something better. Control nodes along the wall, biometric interfaces reacting to proximity. He didn't touch them. He memorized them. Near a recessed alcove, his boots set cataloged and labeled. His jacket folded beside them, internal tools removed, but structural reinforcement intact. They had studied the fabric. They had not understood the man. He dressed fast. Footsteps echoed beyond the newly formed corridor, rapid, multiplied, coordinated. This time they were not confused. They were updating. Rick stepped into the hallway. It split in 3 directions. Identical, featureless, designed to overwhelm prey through symmetry. Rick closed his eyes for half a second, felt vibration through the soles of his boots, tracked airflow shifts, listened to frequency modulation in the hum of the ship. Life signs, human, separated, alive. He chose the corridor that vibrated half a degree warmer. As he moved, he passed a partially open chamber. Smaller restraints inside. Scaled down. Observation displays rotated a holographic projection of a child's neural scan. Elliot's brain activity pulsed calmly. Too calmly. They weren't hurting him. They were studying him. Rick did not stop. He increased pace, not reckless, but faster. Elsewhere in the vessel, the Greys were correcting their earlier miscalculation. They were waking Mary. And this time, they were preparing for resistance. Mary Juniper did not wake peacefully. She surfaced, slowly. The paralysis field weakened in measured increments, designed for compliance, not resistance. It expected panic. It did not account for discipline. Darkness, then sterile light. Her body hung upright, barely supported by the floor. Energy bands wrapped wrists, ankles, ribs, tight, humming at a frequency meant to suppress coordinated motion. She didn't test them immediately. She breathed. Inhale. Exhale. Heart rate elevated. Controlled. Pain minimal. Good. 3 Greys stood before her, still, observing, their heads tilted in subtle synchronization as instruments drifted closer, precision tools for incision, extraction, neural intrusion. The air carried a faint metallic sweetness. Mary cataloged her condition. Shoes gone, watch gone, wedding ring gone, clothing removed. The ring. Her jaw tightened, just slightly. They had placed it in a clear containment tray behind them. Tagged, indexed, cataloged like debris. They had not found the blade. Flat against her spine. Ceramic, non-metallic. Edge refined beyond standard scanner resolution. Secured beneath the small of her back. Rick used to joke about it. Mary never did. The nearest Grey approached. A surgical instrument lowered toward her abdomen, humming softly. Not crude. Not violent. Clinical. Mary let her head dip forward. Let her shoulders slacken. Let her breathing destabilize just enough to suggest fear. The Grey add just proximity, compensating for expected involuntary movement. That was the mistake. Mary twisted at the hips. The motion was small, precise. The knife slid into her palm. She drove it upward under the Grey's jawline, angling toward the neural convergence point she had observed in Rick's scans years ago. Resistance, then penetration. The Grey did not scream. Its eyes did not widen. They flickered, then dimmed. Warm fluid ran over her knuckles. The body collapsed forward, pinning her arm. For half a second, she froze. The smell hit her. Ozone, copper, something sweet and decaying. Her stomach turned hard enough to blur her vision. Then the remaining 2 Greys recalibrated. Not panic, adjustment. Energy output increased in her restraints. Mary pulled the knife free with a sharp wrench and slashed across the restraint node at her wrist. The ceramic edge disrupted the field emitter, not by cutting energy, but by cracking its projection anchor. The band flickered. She tore through it, dropped low before the stasis pulse fired. The pulse froze the space where her torso had been. The second Grey extended a limb toward a wall interface. Mary threw. Not elegant, not cinematic. Desperate. The blade struck the Grey high in the orbital ridge. It staggered but did not fall. They were more resilient than Rick's attackers. Good. Now she knew. Mary closed distance before it recovered. She drove her shoulder into its center mass, destabilizing its balance, then retrieved the knife and forced it sideways beneath the cranial ridge. This time, it collapsed fully. The third Grey was already retreating, communicating silently with the ship's distributed system. Mary saw the subtle shift in lighting. The hum in the walls deepened, threat level rising. She didn't chase immediately. She grabbed the containment tray first. Her wedding ring. Cold, small, real. She slid it onto her finger. Then she moved. The third Grey triggered an aerosol release. A fine mist hissed into the air, sedative. Mary exhaled fully, then held nothing. Advanced low through the fog. The Grey attempted to activate a localized gravity spike. Mary kicked off the wall before it stabilized, crossed the chamber in a diagonal burst, and buried the blade at the base of its skull. The body dropped mid-command. Silence returned, but not ignorance. The ship understood now. Lighting shifted from white to amber. Not alarm. Escalation. Mary staggered once, just once, then steadied herself. Her hands trembled. Not from fear. From adrenaline backlash. She didn't look at the faces. She couldn't. Instead, she moved to a recessed storage panel forced open during containment recalibration. Inside, confiscated items. Cataloged. Sorted. She found her knives. All of them. Cleaned. Measured. Studied. They had underestimated cultural attachment to tools. Mary strapped them on methodically. Thigh. Lower back. Forearm sheath. Her breathing evened. The corridor outside unfolded along curved seams. This time, when she stepped out, 2 security drones were already waiting. Not improvised response. Pre-deployed. Floating constructs with integrated stasis cannons and adaptive shielding. The ship was learning. Good. So was she. The first drone fired. Mary dropped flat. The pulse skimmed above her shoulder and froze a section of wall behind her. She threw at the firing aperture, not the casing. The blade slipped through the microgap during recharge cycle. The drone spasmed and fell. The second activated a rotating shield field. Mary didn't throw. She ran straight at it. At the last second, she slid beneath the shield's arc and drove a blade upward into the exposed undercarriage node. It detonated mid-air, concussive force slamming her into the wall. Her ears rang. She pushed herself up, kept moving. The corridors were no longer pristine. Green fluid streaked across white surfaces. Black scorch marks fractured the symmetry. The ship's intelligence adjusts routes dynamically now, sealing sections, redirecting corridors. But it was still procedural, still rule-bound. Mary moved unpredictably, cutting isolated grays only when necessary, avoiding clusters, disrupting sensors when she could. She passed a chamber where restraints had been torn outward from sheer force. Metal bent, energy nodes shattered. Rick, a flicker of something crossed her face. Not relief, recognition. Further down, a sealed chamber pulsed with reinforced containment fields. Through its translucent surface, Annie, suspended, unconscious, for grays surrounding her. Energy output higher than standard procedure. They had flagged her as higher risk. Good, they were adapting. Mary stepped into the corridor's shadow. Her grip tightened around her knives. Inside that chamber, the Greys were conducting a recalibrated assessment. They believed escalation would restore control. They still believed this was containment. They had not yet understood. This was invasion. Annie Juniper did not wake gently. Her body jerked awake before her thoughts did. Pain flared across her shoulders. Her arms were suspended wide, energy restraints humming at wrists and ribs. Her toes scraped the floor, just enough contact to remind her she wasn't floating. Circular chamber, elevated observation ring, multiple Greys watching. Panels flickered with live data. They weren't preparing to cut her open. They were studying her first. Her chest rose fast. Too fast. She forced it slower. Inhale. Hold. Release. The nearest probe lowered toward her abdomen, its tip vibrating in tight oscillations. Her eyes snapped open. Not calm. Not composed. Focused. She flexed. Not wildly measured. Testing. The restraint around her right wrist pulsed brighter, compensating. So it responded to surge force. Good. She surged harder. The field overloaded for a fraction of a second. That was enough. She twisted, ignoring the tearing burn in her shoulder, and drove her knee upward, not at a Grey, but at the waist anchor node. Impact. Crack. The anchor burst in sparks. The field destabilized. She fell forward more than broke free. The nearest Grey stepped back, recalculating distance. Too slow. Annie closed the gap and slammed its skull into the restraint column. The sound wasn't cinematic. It was brittle. The second strike ensured it stayed down. Warm fluid streaked across her forearm. She didn't look at it. Two more Greys raised emitters. The air thickened, localized gravity compression forming. Annie ran before it locked. She vaulted onto the observation ring using the broken anchor housing as leverage. Her landing jarred her knees. Pain spiked sharp and immediate. No time. A Grey lunged with a surgical instrument. She drove her heel into its sternum. Bone gave. The shock traveled up her own leg. She pivoted, back fist to the temple of the next one. Her knuckles split on impact. It dropped anyway. More hatches dilated. More Greys entered. Not panicked. Structured. Formation spacing. They were adapting. Good. So was she. She dropped low and swept, not perfectly. Her shin connected wrong. Pain lanced upward. The Grey staggered but didn't fall. Annie grabbed its arm and twisted with her whole torso. Ligaments tore. The limbs separated with a wet snap. For half a heartbeat she froze. The sensation was wrong. Too light. Too fragile. Then she used it. The severed limb became a bludgeon against the next Grey's cranial ridge. It collapsed. Her lungs burned now. Each breath tasted metallic. Then the chamber widened. A heavier unit entered. Polished plating. Integrated weapon system. This one was not for observation. Its arm cannon hummed, stabilizing output. Annie felt fear, pure and electric. She charged anyway. The blast hit her mid-stride. The force threw her backward into wall. Impact exploded across her spine. Air left her lungs completely. For a second, she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Her vision narrowed to a thin tunnel. Somewhere in that tunnel, a memory surfaced. Elliot at the viewport. Small hands pressed to glass. She inhaled through the pain. Pushed up. The enforcer recalibrated for a second shot. She didn't dodge cleanly. she threw herself sideways. The blast scorched air across her shoulder. Too close. She rolled under its firing arc and drove both palms into side of its knee joint. Structural seam. She twisted with everything she had left. Metal shrieked. The joint buckled. The enforcer collapsed forward. Annie climbed it, not gracefully, not strategically, just fast. Her legs locked around its upper frame. She hooked her forearm under the exposed neck plating and pulled backward with a raw, shaking roar. Something internal snapped. A deep, final rupture. The unit went still. Annie dropped beside it. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably now. Her ribs screamed with each breath. Blood, hers, ran from her split knuckles onto the polished floor. The chamber was silent, not stunned, processing. The hum of the ship shifted frequency, power redistribution. Containment fields in the room flickered, not because she broke them, but because something elsewhere was draining priority systems. Someone else was fighting. Annie pushed herself upright slowly. Every movement hurt. Good. That meant she was still functional. She picked up the fallen enforcer's compact sidearm. Alien design. Heavy. Responsive. The doors opened along fractured seams. The corridor beyond no longer glowed sterile white. Sections pulsed amber. Others flickered unstable. The ship was reallocating resources dynamically now. No longer underestimating. Annie stepped into the hallway, limping slightly but steady. Somewhere ahead, Rick would be tearing through walls. Mary would be cutting through corridors. Elliot, her jaw tightened. The ship trembled. Not from chaos. From overload. Annie didn't smile. She advanced. And this time, the Greys did not observe. They prepared. Elliot Juniper woke up alone. No restraints. No hovering instruments. No Greys watching from the shadows. That was the first thing that felt wrong. The room was narrow and triangular, walls veined with dim bioluminescent lines that pulsed like a slow heartbeat. Crates were stacked unevenly along one side, organic curves mixed with metallic edges. Some hummed softly. One twitched. He swallowed. His head throbbed behind his eyes. His fingers shook when he lifted them into view. He remembered the light, the paralysis, the way the stars vanished. He slid carefully off the raised platform. Gravity felt lighter, just slightly. Enough that his landing was softer than expected. He stood still, listening. No footsteps, no voices, just the distant vibration of a ship under stress. He checked himself. No cuts, no restraints. His jacket was gone. His pockets were empty, but the leather strap was still around his wrist. The slingshot. He touched it lightly. They hadn't removed it. They hadn't scanned it as a threat. They didn't classify primitive tension weapons as relevant. He didn't smile. He just breathed slower. Elliot had grown up surrounded by information most kids would call paranoia. Old data pads, archived encounters, military briefings that should have been deleted. Patterns. The Greys preferred sedation over confrontation. They preferred containment over escalation. They studied before they harmed. But they reacted poorly to variables, especially kinetic ones, especially chaotic ones. A distant impact reverberated through the walls. Not structural failure. Combat. His heart skipped. Dad. Maybe Mom. Maybe Annie. Elliot crept toward the doorway. Each step felt too loud. He eased himself to the narrow opening and looked out. The corridor beyond flickered in uneven emergency light. White walls now stained. Green fluid smeared across curved surfaces. A body lay collapsed near the far intersection. Gray. Skull partially caved inward. Elliot swallowed hard. He had seen images before. This was different. The air carried a sharp scent, ozone, overheated circuitry. And something organic. Something burned. A conduit ruptured along the ceiling, spraying vapor downward. A Gray caught in the mist convulsed violently. Its skin blistered where the vapor touched. The ship wasn't built for internal chaos. It was built for control. And control was slipping. Elliot's chest tightened, not from fear alone, from realization. This wasn't a surgical abduction anymore. This was escalation. And they hadn't prepared for escalation from inside. He looked down at his slingshot, looked at the corridor again. His hands still trembled, but his thoughts were steady. They had taken his family. They had assumed he was a child. The Greys were about to discover something critical about human children. They grow up fast, especially in the dark. Someone was fighting back. That should have made him feel safer. It didn't. It meant the ship was no longer controlled. It meant escalation. His breathing stuttered, threatening to spiral. He squeezed his eyes shut and forced a thought to repeat. They lose cohesion when unpredictability exceeds modeling. He wasn't calming down. He was compressing fear into something usable. When he opened his eyes, the panic was still there. It just had edges now. He turned from the corridor and went back to the crates. Inside one, he found crystalline nodules embedded in soft suspension foam. They pulsed faintly, contained energy cores. Warm to the touch. Too warm. He rolled one in his palm. It vibrated against his skin. Unstable. Good. He loaded it into the slingshot. His hands shook so badly he had to reset twice. Down the corridor, two Greys advanced cautiously now, emitters raised, movements tighter than before. They weren't curious anymore. They were adapting. Elliot crouched behind a fractured conduit panel. He didn't feel brave. He felt very small. He aimed not at them, but at the power conduit behind them. He released. The snap of leather sounded pathetic. The impact didn't. The crystal detonated in a violent blue-white flare. The corridor buckled inward. The shockwave slammed into Elliot and threw him against the wall. His ears rang instantly. The Greys were hurled sideways, their thin frames twisting unnaturally on impact. One tried to crawl. Elliot stared at what he had just done. His stomach turned. The second Grey dragged itself toward him, one arm bent backward at the wrong angle. Its black eyes fixed on him. Not confusion, not fear. Assessment. That broke the paralysis. He loaded again, aimed lower this time. Released. The projectile struck the cranial junction. The Grey collapsed. Elliot didn't move. He watched the last twitch. He needed to see it, to understand what action meant. Then he swallowed hard and moved. Not like a soldier, like a kid vandalizing something too big to fight directly. He hurled power cells into gravity stabilizer housings. He smashed conduit lines. He triggered micro-detonations in sealed junctions and ran before the blast wave caught him. Twice he trapped himself behind auto-sealed doors and had to double back in cold panic. The third time, he noticed the ceiling lenses, proximity nodes. After that, he started watching the ceilings. Everywhere he went, systems destabilized. Lighting flickered. Sections of corridor tilted 5 degrees off-axis. Security drones misfired at reflections. The ship wasn't built for chaotic internal assault. It was built for controlled disassembly of prey. Elliot wasn't precise. He was erratic, and erratic was worse. In one observation chamber, he saw 3 Greys clustered around a damaged console, movements sharper now, gestures clipped. He fired a crystal into the ceiling above them. Structural mesh failed. The chamber collapsed inward. He didn't look back. Alarms shifted tone. Not containment breach. They had encountered rebellion before. They had studied defiance across dozens of species. But none had attacked infrastructure while embracing self-sacrifice as strategy. Systemic instability. He reached a larger node, central routing architecture. He didn't fully understand it. He didn't need to. He overloaded it anyway. The deck plunged into darkness. Life support flickered. Across the vessel, the central intelligence recalculated. Power rerouted. Security grids collapsed on 2 decks to reinforce a tertiary containment vault. Priority shift. Desperation move. In the vault, layers of stasis fields thinned, then failed. Something inside moved. It did not think in language. It recognized absence. Absence of suppression. Across the hive network of the Greys, signal traffic spiked. Order fractured. For the first time since boarding this system, they were reacting, not orchestrating. The ship shuddered deeply, structural strain, not weapons fire. Primary lighting died across multiple sections. Emergency tones merged into a single oscillating hum. The sound of a vessel losing control. Elliot slid down a wall, sitting hard on the cold floor. His hands were numb. The slingshot hung loosely from his fingers. Coolant had burned the skin across his knuckles. He didn't wipe it. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't strong. He was a kid who read too much. A kid who paid attention. And right now, that was enough to fracture something that had never expected resistance from inside. Somewhere above, metal tore. Somewhere below, something screamed. Not Grey, not human. Elliot forced himself back to his feet. There was no safe direction. Only 2 choices. Toward the screams, or toward his family. He chose his family, and stepped into the dark. Mary reached a junction where the walls were blackened. Floor plating fractured. Ceiling panels blown outward. She crouched and touched the scoring pattern along the bulkhead. Directional blast. Contained yield. Not random. Rick. She followed the damage trail. Above her, a detonation rolled through the structure. Deep and controlled, not catastrophic. Mary allowed herself the smallest smile. That wasn't panic. That was placement. Her family was awake, and the ship was bleeding internally. Rick Juniper didn't wake afraid. He woke furious. Pain burned across his chest, small puncture marks where probes had entered and withdrawn. His wrists were locked into a restraint frame designed to immobilize while neural extraction ran. He tested the restraints once. They held. He stopped testing. Instead, he studied. Power lines embedded in the floor, floating tool arms, containment regulators along the far wall, energy stabilization units, not weapons, but dense, pressurized, useful. Rick flexed his hands slowly, feeling the micro-vibration of the restraint field. It wasn't calibrated for chaos. It was calibrated for resistance within expected biological limits. He exhaled, then dislocated his thumb. The crack was quiet. The pain was not. He did not make a sound. With the added range, he reached the seam of the emitter housing and wedged his thumb into the microscopic gap. Twist. The emitter sputtered. Overcompensated. Failed. The field dropped. Rick rolled off the frame before alarms fully registered. A gray lunged forward with a stun emitter. Rick stepped inside its reach and drove the device back into its face. Fragile bone collapsed under redirected force. He fired once, short burst. 2 more grays dropped, nervous systems overwhelmed. No hesitation now. They had recalculated him. Too late. Rick crossed to the regulator rack. He didn't treat them like bombs. He treated them like pressure systems. He destabilized harmonic balances, offset polarity anchors, introduced time cascade faults. Improvised demolition. Controlled failure. He planted the first device near a vertical conduit spine. Detonation. Not a fireball. A structural rupture. 3 decks lost cohesion. Corridors sheared. Gravity hiccuped violently. Emergency bulkheads sealed, but the damage was already internal. Rick moved. He armed himself with 2 alien rifles, testing recoil response in short bursts. The weapons weren't designed for sustained combat. They were designed for suppression. He adapted. Short arcs. Target the thoracic node. Move. Plant. Advance. He didn't destroy engines outright. He damaged synchronization arrays. He didn't rupture life support. He destabilized circulation timing. Every placement forced the ship to redistribute power, to choose. Survival over dominance. Across the vessel, the Central Intelligence updated his classification. No longer specimen. No longer anomaly. Active systemic threat. The Greys withdrew from direct engagement. Energy barriers sealed observation decks. Technicians retreated to protected nodes. The ship itself engaged countermeasures. The corridor ahead shifted, wall segments detaching, reorienting to funnel him toward containment sectors. Rick adjusted course mid-stride. Atmospheric pressure dropped behind him, wind roaring forward as the ship attempted to destabilize his footing. Gravity spiked to triple standard. His knees buckled, but he kept moving. 0 gravity, then crushing weight, then neutral again. Adaptive suppression. Rick grinned through blood at the corner of his mouth. Now it was fighting seriously. Good. He preferred honest enemies. Rick didn't try to outmaneuver the maze. He corrupted it. Charges went into barrier emitters, into gravitic stabilizers, into feedback relays hidden beneath seamless walls. He wasn't hunting Greys anymore. He was attacking infrastructure. Each detonation didn't just kill. It forced recalculation. Power rerouted. Security grids collapsed in one sector to reinforce another. The ship began prioritizing survival over capture. That was the first real shift. Then the tremor came. Not mechanical, not explosive, deep, resonant. It traveled through the soles of his boots and into his spine. Rick paused. Somewhere below, something massive shifted. The lights cut completely. 5 seconds of absolute darkness. No alarms, no gravity fluctuation, just silence. Then the emergency tone returned. Lower, slower, foundational containment failure. Rick didn't smile this time. That wasn't his work. The Greys weren't just fighting him anymore. They were fighting something they had chosen to keep. A security unit rounded the corner and fired. The shock cannon hit him square in the chest. The impact lifted him off his feet and slammed him through a partial bulkhead. Something cracked in his ribs. Air vanished from his lungs. For half a second, black crept into his vision. He forced himself upright anyway, breathing shallow, moving, always moving. He dropped a destabilized regulator at the unit's feet. Detonation. Localized implosion. The Enforcer folded inward under its own armor plating. Rick staggered forward. He reached the central armory. Reinforced. Triple sealed. He didn't waste time trying to bypass it. He overloaded the door's gravitic hinge system and stepped back. The explosion didn't tear the ship open, but it ruptured the compartment violently. Weapons racks were shredded. Stored munitions ignited in chain reaction. A section of outer hull fractured, spiderweb cracks spreading before atmosphere vented in a violent scream. Stars became visible through a widening breach. Loose bodies and debris were pulled outward in chaotic spirals. Rick anchored himself to a support strut, muscles screaming as decompression tried to take him with it. The hull auto-sealed partially, emergency lattice forming over the rupture. Barely holding. He didn't laugh. He breathed through the pain. They had wanted to examine human adaptability. Now they were watching it dismantle them. Rick moved again. He reached a primary power routing column and forced a manual override. He didn't shut systems down. He redistributed load. Away from stabilization. Away from secondary containment. Towards stress thresholds. The vessel was built to endure cosmic radiation and vacuum pressure, not cascading internal sabotage across its own neural grid. The ship shuddered harder. Metal screamed. Deep inside, something no longer confined pushed against weakened boundaries. The Greys shifted fully defensive now. Extraction craft activated. Core sector sealed. Hive signal traffic spiked erratically. Rick headed toward the hangar. Not because it was safe, because convergence points are predictable. He didn't search for his family. He knew them. Mary would be cutting through corridors. Annie would be breaking through resistance. Elliot, he pushed that thought down. They wouldn't scatter. They would move toward each other. That wasn't strategy. That was gravity. And gravity always wins. They reunited in the hangar, not by chance, but because it was the only open space left in the dying ship, the natural endpoint of every path of destruction. Rick emerged first. He didn't stride out. He limped into the open, each step deliberate. Blood matted his hair and soaked through a tear in his pants. The alien rifle on his back looked wrong on him. The detonator in his hand did not. Smoke and burning plastic followed him like a shroud. Mary stepped out from a shredded corridor. There was no calm precision left. Her movements were efficient, but strained, like glass about to fracture. The knife in her hand was dark to the hilt. Alien blood wasn't splattered on her. It was painted across her arms and torso in violent strokes. Her face was pale, fixed. Her eyes were hollow in a way they hadn't been before. With a grunt and a crash of metal, Annie dropped from a mangled catwalk above. She didn't land cleanly. She hit hard, knees buckling, catching herself with one hand and a sharp gasp. When she rose, her whole body trembled with exhaustion. Her breath came ragged and wet. Her knuckles were split and bruised beyond recognition. And her eyes didn't burn with clarity. They burned with something deeper. Pain turned into fury. Elliot came last. He didn't run. He scrambled out from behind cracked cargo crates, movements jerking with leftover fear. He clutched his slingshot like something sacred, the pouch of crystals slapping against his leg. His face was chalk pale. A single dried tear marked a track through the grime. His eyes moved constantly, not like a soldier, but like prey. For a long second, they looked at one another. No one spoke. Words had broken hours ago, back when they were still a family on vacation. What passed between them now was older than language, damage assessed in silence. Rick saw the shock in Mary's eyes. Mary saw Rick's limp and the ruin of Annie's hands. Annie saw Elliot's pallor, the child replaced by something sharpened and frightened. And Elliot saw all of it, the blood, the fury, the cost, and understood they would never be the same. Something settled between them. Not a strategy, a pact. They weren't a perfect weapon. They were broken, bleeding, terrified, and that made them more dangerous than any army. They had nothing left to lose, except each other. The hangar stretched vast and cold, open to the stars through a flickering force barrier. At the far end sat the Juniper ship, locked down by gravitic anchors and surrounded by Grey security units. The Greys had gathered everything that remained. Not just soldiers, technicians, handlers, command cast. The last refuge of a collapsing system. To them, the 4 humans across the hangar were not a wounded family. They were the reason their perfect world was dying. Heavy enforcers activated shield walls. Drones lifted, weapons humming. The command cast pulsed frantic signals through the Hive network. This was the end. Rick moved first. No shout, just a tired grunt as he hurled a charge into the center of the shield wall and detonated it mid-air. The shields didn't shatter, they overloaded. Energy convulsed outward in a violent surge that vaporized the enforcers, reducing them to drifting organic mist. Annie charged through the gap before it closed. Not with discipline, with pain. She didn't break bones cleanly. She shattered bodies with elbows, knees, forehead. A shock baton struck her shoulder. She screamed, grabbed the gray holding it, and used both as weapons. Mary followed. Where Annie was impact, Mary was necessity. She cut anything that moved near her. Not with artistry, not with elegance, just removal. Anything between her and her family stopped being alive. Elliot folded behind a crate. His hands shook so badly the first crystal fell. He swallowed, grabbed it, loaded, fired. Not precision, disruption, feet, weapons, ground, clusters, chaos. A drone crashed near him, and he flinched hard, nearly losing the slingshot again. Rick advanced in a painful rhythm. Short bursts of rifle fire, every recoil tearing through his side. He planted charges not like a strategist, but like a man burning down a cage. Explosions followed behind him, fuel cells, struts, weapon racks. The hangar didn't collapse cleanly. It came apart. The Greys broke. Not orderly retreat, collapse. Some ran for escape pods. Rick saw it, pressed the detonator. The pods vanished in silent flashes. No smile, just a closed door. The family reached their ship not running, but dragging themselves forward together. Annie became an immovable wall of fury, while Elliot scrambled into the cockpit, fumbling over controls that suddenly felt foreign. Systems screamed as they powered up. They were not victorious. They were surviving. Mary cut the gravitic anchors manually. From a central shaft where Rick had thrown his final charge, molten metal erupted upward. And inside the inferno, for a second, a shape moved. Impossible, jagged, wrong, not destroyed. Awakened, Elliot's sabotage had collapsed containment in the vaults below. Something ancient had followed the destruction upward. It did not save the humans. It did not fight for them. It simply followed rupture and weakness, accelerating a collapse that was already inevitable. The hangar doors began to close. Rick turned once. He threw his final charge, the largest, into the core shaft. Boarded, engines ignited. The Juniper vessel tore free as the hangar imploded. Inside the gray ship, containment failed entirely. Power cascaded. The disk cracked along its axis, glowing like a dying star. From the fractures came not only light, but shapes, fragments, nightmares, collected horrors from 100 worlds. Then, silence. The explosion was not just reactors and fuel. It was the death of an arc. A museum of atrocities erased in a single instant. Light expanded outward. The Juniper ship punched through the shockwave, shields flaring, hull rattling, but intact. Behind them, nothing. No Greys, no ship, no threat. Only debris and fading radiation. Moments later, they jumped to hyperspace. The Greys had wanted specimens. They captured a family. They awakened a species. The stars returned, punctual, serene. The Juniper family ship moved through the dark, its hull scarred like a trophy from a war no one else would ever know happened. Systems whispered back to life. Emergency lighting faded into a soft, steady glow, restoring warmth to the interior. Outside, the void remained unchanged. Inside, something had settled. Rick stayed in the cockpit, hands steady on the controls. The pain was still there, a physical reminder. He knew some of it would never fully fade, but it was smaller now, drowned beneath something heavier. Relief. Hard-earned. Solid. He looked at his family, alive, whole, and a quiet understanding rooted itself in him. The war inside him was not a curse. It was a safeguard. A guarantee that no matter how dark the universe became, he carried within him the will to defend his light. Humans aren't violent. They protect. And when protection demands it, they discover a courage even they didn't know they possessed. Mary cleaned her knife and returned it to its place. Her movements were the same, precise, deliberate, but there was new weight behind them. The gray ship hadn't broken her. It had refined her. She had stared into something monstrous and found something stronger within herself. Monsters exist, but an ordinary mother with something to protect is the last thing a monster wants to face. Annie rolled her shoulders slowly, feeling the ache in every muscle. The bandages wrapped around her hands were not defeat. Some fractures would take months to mend. Some scars would never disappear. They were proof. Discipline carried her. Love finished the fight. She had learned her strength wasn't for show. It was for preservation. And to preserve her family, she would tear apart anything that stood in the way, even the stars themselves. Elliot watched the navigation screen, constellations marking their return. His mind, once filled with other people's legends, now carried one of its own. Knowledge saved them. Curiosity guided them. He wasn't the boy reading about heroes anymore. He had become part of the story, and he understood something simple and absolute. The greatest weapon in the galaxy isn't a fleet. It's a human mind that refuses to give up on the people it loves. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The silence was no longer heavy. It was complete. They had faced the unimaginable. They hadn't just survived. They had won. Together, the galaxy would continue, indifferent as ever. But somewhere in drifting debris and fading radiation, a lesson had been written in fire. Humans are not prey. They are not specimens. They are not passive. They are families. And underestimating a human family is the last mistake any predator will ever make. They adapt. They endure. They answer. And now, they breathe. The Junipers adjust their course, setting a destination chosen not for strategy, but for peace, beaches, open skies, something ordinary. The journey continued. They were not broken. They were forged. They were not naive. They were aware. The universe is vast. It is dangerous. But the Junipers learned something no alien archive could ever catalog. The most powerful force in existence is not gravity, not fusion, not advanced technology. It is the bond between a father, a mother, a brother, and a sister, and the unspoken promise that none of them will ever be left behind. With that certainty anchoring them, they flew on, toward home,